let me ask you something. We all know Isla Nublar. We know Isla Sorna. But what if I told you there was another island? An island that officially exists, but almost nobody talks about. Somewhere inside an old InGen filing cabinet, there's a lease agreement from 1985. Honestly, it's one of the most boring documents you could imagine. Just signatures, coordinates, legal paperwork, a 99-year lease. But hidden inside all that paperwork is the name of an island, Isla Tacaño. For almost 30 years, that lease agreement was practically the only proof the island even existed. And then someone asked a question the paperwork never answered. What if it wasn't empty? Imagine a velociraptor that doesn't just hunt you, it watches you, learns how you speak, memorizes your voice, and then somewhere in the darkness, you hear your own voice calling your name. Not because another survivor found you, but because it did. And in the darkest versions of this story, those creatures don't see you as prey, they see you as their father. None of this happened in a Jurassic Park movie. You won't find it in the novels either. This story was born somewhere in the space between what Jurassic Park told us and what it never explained. So, pull your chair a little closer to the fire. Tonight, our story begins in the gaps. You know what's strange about Jurassic Park? For a franchise built around dinosaurs and giant islands, there are actually quite a few places we know almost nothing about, and Isla Tacaño is one of them. It's part of the Muertes Archipelago, the same island chain that contains Isla Nublar and Isla Sorna. InGen acquired Tacaño in 1985, but unlike Sorna, there was no famous Site B. Unlike Nublar, there was no Jurassic Park. As far as the official story goes, there's simply not much to tell. And honestly, that's what makes it such a perfect place for a horror story. Because when a story leaves you a blank space, somebody is eventually going to fill it. And that's exactly what fans did. They took this relatively obscure island and imagined that while the world was watching Hammond's dream being built on Nublar, something else was happening on Tacaño. No tourists, no giant visitor center, no families taking pictures with dinosaurs, just a facility hidden away from the public, and scientists working on something nobody was supposed to see. And this is where we need to make something clear. What I'm about to tell you isn't official Jurassic Park canon. It's the fan-made analog horror interpretation of Isla Tacaño. And in this version, the island wasn't empty at all. It was hiding something, and whatever was happening there was about to turn one of InGen's biggest scientific achievements into something far worse. So if Isla Tacaño was hiding something, what exactly were they doing there? And this is where things get really disturbing, because according to the analog horror story, the people working on Tacaño weren't trying to simply recreate dinosaurs. They were trying to improve them. And at the center of it all was a name Jurassic Park fans already know. Dr. Henry Wu. Now, Wu was already doing something incredible. He was taking incomplete dinosaur DNA, filling the gaps, and using it to bring extinct animals back to life. But imagine what happens when a scientist stops asking, how do we recreate what nature made, and starts asking, what else can we make? According to the story, the experiments on Isla Tacaño pushed genetic engineering far beyond anything Hammond had intended. Different species were being combined, new traits were being introduced, and eventually, human DNA entered the equation. And no, they weren't trying to make dinosaurs that could simply think like humans. The idea was much more ambitious. Create creatures that could learn faster, adapt faster, understand their environment in ways normal animals couldn't. Basically, take millions of years of evolution and try to force it into a laboratory. And here's the part that really gets me. I don't think anyone involved necessarily woke up one morning thinking, let's create a monster. That's not how this kind of thing happens. You get one successful experiment, then another. Something works better than expected, so you push it a little further, and then another line gets crossed, and another. Until eventually, you aren't recreating life anymore. You're designing it. And somewhere inside that facility, the experiments started becoming something their creators couldn't control. Because the creatures weren't just changing physically, they were learning. And once your experiment can learn, you have to start wondering, what happens when it learns that you're afraid of it? By this point, you might be wondering, how did anyone realize something had gone wrong? Because apparently the first warning wasn't a monster breaking through a wall. It was something much quieter. The reports started changing. Experiments that were supposed to produce predictable results weren't. The creatures were developing differently from what the scientists expected. Some were more aggressive, some were more intelligent, and some simply didn't look right. At first, the researchers treated these things like problems with the experiment. Change the sequence, try another combination, grow another specimen. And that's the terrifying thing about a laboratory. You can make something horrifying sound completely normal if you put it in a research report. Specimen failed, experiment terminated, begin next trial. Until eventually, there were too many things that couldn't be explained away. Then came the incident. And this is where John Hammond enters the story. He arrives on Isla Tacaño expecting to see another example of InGen's scientific progress. Instead, he finds an island that has gone strangely quiet. Empty corridors, abandoned equipment, doors that should have been locked, standing open. And then he notices something. The security cameras are still working. Hammond watches the monitors. At first, nothing. Just empty rooms, empty hallways. Then, movement. Something passes the edge of the camera. He rewinds the footage, plays it again. And this time, he sees it. It isn't moving like a normal dinosaur. It's standing there, watching the camera. And then it looks directly into the lens, like it knows someone is watching. Hammond doesn't know what he's looking at yet. But then the creature does something that makes the entire room go silent. It speaks, and it says a name. Hammond. Hammond. That's what the creature said. And if you're wondering how a dinosaur could possibly know his name, this is where the story gets much stranger. Because according to the analog horror version of Isla Tacaño, Hammond wasn't just involved in the project. His own DNA had been used in the experiments. And suddenly that creature looking into the camera makes a little more sense. Maybe it wasn't looking at Hammond like prey. Maybe it recognized him. The story takes the idea of genetic engineering and pushes it somewhere much darker. These creatures weren't simply dinosaurs with a few modified genes. They were biological experiments built around the idea that human traits could be mixed into prehistoric life. And that creates something much worse than a normal predator. Because a normal predator doesn't need to understand you. It just needs to catch you. But what if the thing hunting you can recognize your face? Understand your voice, remember what you did, maybe even learn from you. And this is where the creatures of Isla Tacaño become truly disturbing. Some of them still look vaguely like dinosaurs. Others look like something went horribly wrong somewhere between the laboratory and the living world. Bodies that don't quite make sense. Familiar features in completely unfamiliar places. And worst of all, traces of human behavior. Imagine walking through an abandoned facility at night. You hear something moving outside. You freeze. Then you hear a voice, your voice, calling your name from somewhere in the darkness. And you realize, whatever is out there has been listening to you. That's the real nightmare behind Isla Tacaño. Not that the dinosaurs became stronger, not that they became bigger. They became something that could understand us. And once the scientists realized what they'd created, the island stopped being a laboratory. It became a containment problem. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, creepy dinosaurs, weird experiments, human DNA. But why does this particular story feel so much worse than just dinosaurs are attacking people? And I think the answer is actually pretty simple. We don't know what we're looking at. A T-Rex is terrifying, but you understand a T-Rex. It's an animal. You know roughly what it wants. You know how it behaves. But the creatures of Isla Tacaño don't follow that rule. They're familiar enough to recognize, but strange enough that your brain can't quite understand them. And then there's the human part. A creature that looks like a dinosaur is one thing, but give it something human, human features, human intelligence, even a human voice. And suddenly your brain starts asking questions it really doesn't want answered. Does it understand me? Does it remember me? Is it watching me? And that's where the analog horror format becomes so effective. You aren't watching a hero walk through the island and explain everything. You're watching fragments. A damaged recording, a security camera, a scientist's report, a few seconds of footage, and then nothing. The story doesn't show you everything. It makes you imagine what happened between the recordings. And honestly, that's probably worse. Because when you can see the monster clearly, eventually you get used to it. But when the footage cuts out just before you see what entered the room, your imagination finishes the scene for you. And your imagination has a much bigger budget than any dinosaur movie. But there's something else that makes Isla Tacaño especially disturbing. The creatures aren't supernatural. At least that's the idea. They were made. Somebody decided to create them. Somebody approved the experiments. Somebody kept going when they should have stopped. And that's what makes the island feel less like a haunted place and more like a crime scene. Because every monster here started with the same thing, a human decision. And maybe that's the real horror of Isla Tacaño. Not that nature created something unnatural, but that we did.